how exactly did things go sideways with Sarah? Can you pinpoint the moment things got awkward with Ian? What really made things break with you and Ben? When was it that the relationship was done with David? We all have those relationships that, for whatever reason, are frustrating or fraught with difficulty. What should be a good thing has suddenly turned into a difficult, awkward, sometimes outright nasty thing. In fact, I know that as I say that, as I list those names, as I speak that truth, that often there are relationships that get broken and bad and sideways, that instantly some names and some faces come to mind for you. So let's just call it out. Who comes to mind for you? Fill in these blanks for me. My life, my relationship with blank should be great, should be good. Instead, it's blank. My life with so-and-so should be great, should be good. Instead, it's what? Maybe for you, it's Ted. My life with my brother Ted should be great. Instead, every time I get together with Ted, it's tense. Today, we're starting a new teaching series called Relationship Rehab, where we're hoping to breathe some life into that relationship with you and Ted. We're going to make the case for why we should, and then illustrate how we can pursue relational rehabilitation in those important relationships that are all around us, but for whatever reason have gotten sideways. Now, first things first, why is this worthwhile? Why should we pursue making relationships right? And for followers of Jesus, the answer is frustratingly obvious. For followers of Jesus, the answer is Jesus. This is the case that Paul makes in Romans. Paul is trying to help the church understand that Jesus has poured incredible gifts into their life. Jesus has given them love, he's given them mercy, he's given them grace, he's given them the gift of a reconciled relationship with God, and he's trying to help them understand that these things that we've been given are not meant to stay with us, but instead they are to flow through us. Or to put it another way, loved people love people. And forgiven people, well, they forgive people. And reconciled people, they seek to reconcile with people. And that's how it is with any amazing thing that you experience or that you are given as a gift. If it's truly amazing and transformative, you don't want to keep it to yourself. You want to replicate that experience with other people. You want to hand it to them. You want to give it as a gift to them. Paul puts it like this at the end of this section in Romans chapter 12. He summarizes this long list of what love should look like flowing through us to other people by saying this. He says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. So let me ask you again, with whom do you need to pursue peace? With whom do you need to enter relationship rehab? Now, that's not to say that you haven't been trying. When relationships are broken, we try all different kinds of tactics. The problem is that typically the tactics we employ only serve to make things worse. I can think of 3 major tactics that we tend to attempt when relationships get bad or broken. And the first tactic is this: we delay. We delay. Or in other words, I'll get back to them. I'll put it off. Maybe it'll solve itself on its own. I'll get back to them. I delay it. Another tactic that we take is we destroy it. This is a tactic that's often taken when someone has hurt you or wronged you, and you feel justified in there being an estrangement between the two of you because the other person was mean, evil, and awful, and you're just like, well, I'm just going to blow it up because you deserve it. You could say this tactic is summarized like this: not I'll get back to them, but I'm going to get back at them or with them. And then the third tactic is to just despair, to be hopeless. I'm going to give up on them. This is often known as the Taylor Swift approach, the we are never, ever, ever getting back together approach. The relationship gets so frustrated and fraught that you're just like, well, it's hopeless, let's give up on it. I'm just going to wash my hands of the whole thing and walk away. But as you might be able to guess, Followers of Jesus are invited to a fourth way, a different way. Rather than delay it or destroy it or despair over it, quite simply, what we're invited to do is to take a posture of compassion and kindness towards this person, and we are to seek to bless them. We're called to bless them. Relational repair begins with kindness. It begins with a choice to be kind and compassionate to the person that you are at odds with. Just think again of all the words that Paul uses in Romans chapter 12 to describe our relationship with other people. Let's look again. Romans chapter 12, verses 9 through 10, and then verse 14. Paul says, "Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly, sisterly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them." Living at peace, relational repair, begins with a commitment to be kind. Begins with a commitment to be kind. Now again, I feel like I can read your emails that are already being crafted right now. They're being sent to me. Some of you are sitting there right now going, "Oh, I'm going to write him a note." And the note's going to go like this: "Pastor Matt, some relationships can't be fixed and shouldn't be fixed. Some people are so toxic, they've caused so much trauma that you have to leave it alone." And my response to you is going to be this, okay? I don't disagree. That is a sad fact of life in a sinful, messed up world. Some people are so toxic, some people cause so much trauma that you cannot have a functional relationship with them as you previously thought of functional relationships going forward. I get that. But here's what I would challenge you on. I would say, contrary to what we are so quick to believe in this day and age, where we so easily say, "Well, I got to go no contact with this person," where we so easily jump to the place of saying, "Well, this person is so toxic, I cannot have them in my life," I would say to you that for a follower of Jesus, those relationships where you truly have to go no contact, cut them out because it's so toxic, so traumatic, should be very few and very far between. The truth is that in most relationships, the vast majority of relationships, there can be reconciliation to some degree. It may have to be reconciliation with some really firm, really strong boundaries so that abuse doesn't take place, so that the worst version of themselves doesn't manifest. But there's typically some form of a functional relationship that can be found if there's boundaries put in place. Reconciliation can happen to degrees. And even if reconciliation is not possible, the posture of the heart of a follower of Jesus is to be one who, even if we know it's so messed up, it's never going to be okay again, our hearts, aligned with God's heart, should still long for it to be right. And never truly be okay with it not being okay. We should long for relationships to be made whole, even if we know the only way this relationship is going to be whole, because it's so messed up, is when Jesus comes back and makes all the bad things untrue. Now, in those relationships where some form of repair and reconciliation is possible, where do we begin? Well, in Romans chapter 12, Paul outlines really a shift in attitude, a change in heart and mind. And what I want to focus on are three very simple, not easy, but simple shifts in heart and mind that we need to take in order for relational repair to even be possible. It comes down to like three instincts that we need to purge from our system, that we need to expel from our thinking. And the first is this: we need to get rid of the instinct to villainize the other person. We must abandon the instinct that we are somehow justified to villainize the other person. When someone harms us or wrongs us, we feel incredibly self-righteous about our ability to point the finger at them. And truth be told, if someone has wronged you or hurt you, you do have the right to call it out. You do have the ability to say, hey, look, that behavior is not okay. But what happens is we want to paint a picture of the person. Rather than call out what the person did, what we start to do, because it helps us make sense of things and helps us get a sense of control over things, we start to paint a picture of the other person that is not flattering, to say the least. You ever gone to the carnival and have somebody draw your picture? You know what it's like. You think it's going to be fun. You pay them $40. And then they sit down and they draw this picture of you where they have taken everything that you don't like about your face, about your body, and they have accentuated it and blown it up, and then they turn it around and they're like, here, how you like that? And you're like, I want to go home and burn that. That's what I want to do. This is supposed to be fun with me and my kids, and now you got my nose that's 15 feet long. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. When we get sideways with somebody else, in order to wrap our minds around why things aren't okay, we start to paint a picture. And we become carnival caricature artists. And we accentuate the bad. And we lean on those bad characteristics to help make ourselves feel okay. It typically goes like this. Well, I'm good, they're bad. My motives are pure, their motives are corrupt. My intentions are right, their intentions are wrong. My choices are justified, their choices are irrational. And while there's always some semblance of truth in the picture that you're painting, it's not a trustworthy image because it's been bent and distorted and massaged. You can't trust that image that gets painted. And you have to resist that urge. Resist that urge. We must resist the instinct, abandon the instinct to villainize the other person. Instead, look at the picture that Paul invites us to paint of the other person. Look again, Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, starting at verse 10. Love one another with brotherly affection. Show hospitality. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. What Paul is saying is, rather than villainize, you are encouraged, if not commanded, to humanize the other person. Fight the urge to make them less than. And do whatever you can to round out the picture of seeing them as a child of God. That's what he's talking about when he says, treat each other with brotherly and sisterly affection. Remember, no matter what they did to you, Christ still died for them. Treat them with brotherly, sisterly affection. It says show hospitality. Treat them with basic human dignity and compassion and kindness. And he says weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice. Recognize that their emotions about all of this are just as valid as yours. Sit with them in their emotions just as much as you want other people to come and sit with you in yours. Humanize them. Don't villainize them. And if you can't humanize them, remember these words of Paul. In the same passage, verse 12, he says, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. When you don't have it in you to bless them, when you find it impossible to humanize them, and here's how you know if it's impossible to humanize them, if you really it's all backward and broken in your own heart towards this person. If you can't stomach the idea of saying something nice about them without qualifying it with a story about how they're the worst in the world, that's a problem. If you're struggling to humanize them, follower of Jesus, you are called to pray for them. Pray for God to help you see them the way he does. And to keep your heart soft towards them rather than become hardened with bitterness. Did you know this is what Jesus does for us? Jesus is on the cross, being crucified. His enemies are murdering him. His enemies are literally murdering him. And yet, while Jesus Christ is on the cross, he chooses, I can't even wrap my head around this. He chooses to interpret their murder of him in the most compassionate, generous way possible. And then he prays for them. If anyone was ever justified in being a little bit upset at his enemies for, murder, it's Jesus. I imagine that Jesus, in his humanity, was tempted to spit right back or to call them out or to curse them out. But instead, listen to what he says. Jesus says this. This is incredible. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. I got a prayer for you that you might want to consider for this other person. It's another fill in the blank, and it goes like this. Help me to see this person as you do. Help me to feel towards them as you do. Just a hint, you might want to jot this one down. Help me to feel toward them as you do. Help me to see them as you do. We must abandon the instinct to villainize and instead attempt to humanize. The other instinct that we have to abandon is we have to abandon our instinct to retaliate and instead rest in the justice of God. When we have been wronged by somebody else, when a relationship has been broken because someone has been bad to us, we instantly and understandably, we take the moral high ground and we feel very justified in calling them out for what they've done, and we feel as though justice is in our hands and that accountability and punishment is ours to wield. On Sunday mornings before church, I roll out of bed typically around 4 a.m., and because I'm a nice husband and father, I try not to wake up the rest of the family when I get out of bed at 4 a.m., which means very often on Sunday mornings, I'm getting dressed in the dark. I'm like pulling on pants, buttoning up shirts the wrong way because it is completely dark, because I don't want to wake up anybody else, which means that on more than one occasion, I have stubbed my toe on the corner of the bed or on like the door frame as I walk through the hallway in the dark. I know, worst feeling in the world, right? And I just full kind of honesty sharing time with you. I have this really bad instinct that like when I stub my toe, when I'm like kind of hurt or in pain out of nowhere, especially like if the lights are off, I stub my toe and my response is to just try and hit something. So I stub my toe and then I pray. And then I'm just like, my arm's going, and then, I'll catch my fist on some piece of furniture on some wall, which doesn't help my toe. It doesn't really bother the wall. It only makes me feel worse. When we try to wield justice, when we try to take punishment and accountability in our own hands, when it's not our job, what we are doing, having stubbed our toe on their idiocy, we then are punching in the dark, trying to retaliate, and typically the only thing it does is make us feel worse. It only hurts us more. Instead, what we are invited to do is to trust that justice belongs to God. If you're a follower of Jesus, this is stated as clearly in the scriptures as anything else. Justice belongs to God. And Paul reiterates it here. Let's look again at what it says. Romans chapter 12, verse 19. Beloved, never avenge yourselves. Never. But leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. If someone has sinned against you and hurt you, I know that what you want to do is hold them accountable personally. What you feel justified in doing is punishing them. But if you're here as a follower of Jesus Christ, you need to hear this. That is not your job. It is not your job to punish other people. Instead, it is your job to trust in the authority structures that God has put in place in this world and in God's own divine judgment in the end. Justice and accountability and punishment when needed is God's job. And he will make sure that this person who did something awful or evil to you, he will make sure that the authority structures that he's put in place, this person's spouse who's there to call them out, or this person's employer who's there to hold them accountable, or if need be, the police and the DA. God will work through these authority structures to hold this person accountable. Now, should you make those authorities aware of the need for accountability? Absolutely. Should you advocate for this to never happen again? Absolutely. But there are people in this world who have been given the vocation by God to hold this person accountable and, if necessary, to punish them. And that is God's way of bringing justice in this world. It's not your job. And if for some reason justice doesn't happen there is this ultimate justice. Justice was done upon Jesus' shoulders for the terrible thing that person did to you. God agrees what they did to you was awful, evil, and sinful. Somebody needs to pay for it, and he put it on the shoulders of his own son to pay for it. And someday, in the very end, this person who hurt you, who is now sideways with you, is going to stand before God. And they are either going to plead mercy and grace based on the fact that Jesus Christ has already been punished for the terrible thing that they did to you, in which case mercy and grace is theirs, or they will arrogantly, ignorantly stand on their own 2 feet and say, no, I stand by every choice and decision I've ever made, even my choice to do this to him, which led to our relationship breaking. At that point, God will bring justice. But it is not your job. In fact, follower of Jesus, when you insist on being the arbiter of justice, by, let's just illustrate a picture, by screaming at them, or by going all Carrie Underwood and putting your keys along the side of their car, or walking around making your case to 1,000 different people who share a relationship with this person. Pleading your case for how they're the worst and you're the best. Stirring up strife and dissension here and here and here and here in the name of making them look bad and making you look good. What you're functionally doing is saying, I don't trust you to hold this person accountable or to bring justice. I don't trust you. I don't trust that you can bring justice. I don't trust that the cross has already punished this sin, so I got to take your job and do it myself. That is, in many ways, what you're saying. And if relational repair is going to take place, you have to give up that attitude and that notion that justice is your job. It's not. Rest in the justice of God. Now I've got one more for you. We must abandon our instinct to go second. And instead, we got to go first. We got to wrap our hearts and minds around the fact that if things are going to get better, we're going to have to go first. When I was in middle school, last century, we had a computer programming class, and it was with like these ancient kind of early computers, and on the monitor was just a green screen with a blinking cursor. And we did some very rudimentary computer programming. And the computer programming was if, then, or else statements. If this, then this, else this. Very rudimentary computer programming. And the idea was, it's like if you could build the if-then statements appropriately, then at the end of all these if-then statements, the screen would be filled with dollar signs in the shape of a flower or something like that. And I think that kind of rudimentary programming somehow made its way into my brain and in the brains of many in my generation into how we think about relationships. We have an if, then, or else approach to relationships. When things have gotten broken or bad, we think, well, it's on the other person. If they say this, if they do that, then I will reciprocate, or else they will get the blue screen of death. But the onus is on them. If they act appropriately, if they cross a certain threshold, then I will respond kindly, compassionately, and then things can get better. Or else they're just going to stay bad or get worse. Friends, if relational repair is going to happen, you're going to have to abandon that idea altogether. Look, I know that relationships take two, but repair starts with one. Relationships take two. Repair always starts with one. And the question is, are you willing to be the one? Are you willing? And if that sounds familiar, if you're here as a follower of Jesus, it should sound really familiar. It's because that's what we see in Christ. He did not wait for us to draw near to him. There was no if-then statement in your relationship with God being made right. He did not wait for anything to happen on our part. Instead, he drew near to us. Paul, earlier in Romans, makes this case where he says beautifully, Romans chapter 5, verse 8, he says, God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, not once we'd gotten our act together, not after we'd really apologized, not once we'd proven we'd be good stewards of our second chance. He says, no, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God did not wait for us to make the first move. He knew if there was going to be a second act in our relationship, he was going to have to go first. And so he was willing to die. Not just die a physical death, which of course he did to atone for your sins and mine, but to die to his right to be right. To set aside his identity as the offended, as the wronged party. He was right and just to be sitting on that throne saying, you wronged me. I'm the holy God. You wronged me. Instead, he sacrificed all of that and he said, if it's going to get better, I gotta go first. And relational repair in your life looks exactly the same. I'll end where I began, with that fill in the blank. Life with blank should be great. Instead, it's blank. You got anything to throw in there? Good. Now, what are you going to do about it? I don't want to make this sound like it's easy in any capacity. I recognize that relationships that are fraught are filled with context and long stories and a whole lot of gray area and a whole lot of hurt. I get it. But all I'll say in closing is this. If it for you seems impossible to try and figure out how to have some semblance of a functional relationship with this other person, if it feels impossible for you, I would encourage you just, despite this long conversation, to just set that notion aside for a second and spend some time reflecting on and dwelling on the right relationship that God the Father has given to you through Jesus. Just receive again the truth that everything between you and him is good and fine and perfect and holy despite a whole bunch of dysfunction. Spend some time and just simply say, thank you for that. Give God praise for that. Recognize and celebrate that. Sit with that. All is right between me and God. All is good between me and God. Just sit in that. And watch and hope, and I pray that over the course of time, the idea of getting things right with Ted, stinking Ted, will not only become plausible, but desirable. Amen.